Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, investigators looking for a motive into that mass shooting at a Christian school in Tennessee. The shooter killed 6 people, including 3 children. Police described the scene as horrific.
I was literally moved to tears to see this and the kids as they were being ushered out of the building.
We're learning more about that shooter, reportedly a former student of the school and transgender. See how the attack was carried out and who were the victims. In Israel, protests calm after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu puts his judicial reform plan on hold. We'll look at his next steps and why this battle may not be over. Christian organizations bringing relief to Mississippi after the tornado that left a trail of death and destruction.
The houses on the outskirts of town were virtually untouched, but once you seemed to cross an invisible line, the destruction got increasingly bad, and to a point where there was only piles of debris in the center of town.
And you may think you're being healthy, but eating too much of even the right foods can be the wrong thing to do.
You can get yourself into trouble and have no idea, so it carries on for a long time because you would never suspect your favorite great food.
See why too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. Those stories and more today on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
I want to begin this half hour with the investigation into that horrific shooting at a Christian school in Nashville, Tennessee. Flags across the country flying at half-staff today, honoring the 6 victims of the deadly school shooting in Nashville. 6 people are dead, 3 of them young children. The alleged shooter, a transgender who may have once attended the school, is also dead. Unfolded Monday morning at the Covenant School, a Christian school with 200 students from preschool through 6th grade. Police released disturbing new images showing how the deadly events unfolded.
There's multiple victims down inside the school. Shooter is down now as well.
The shooter identified as Audrey Hale, a 28-year-old female who identifies as transgender. This surveillance video shows Hale driving up to the school and firing through a glass door to gain entry. The shooter was armed with 2 assault-style weapons and a pistol, seen here in new images released by police. Once inside, investigators say Hale shot and killed 6 people.
3 of those were children. 2 of them were age 9. 1 was 8, about to be 9.
The young victims are identified as Evelyn Dacus, William Kinney, and Hallie Scruggs. Scruggs is the daughter of the pastor of Covenant Presbyterian Church. The head of the school, Catherine Kuntz, was also killed, along with teacher Cynthia Peak and custodian Mike Hill.
We just need to embrace those that are grieving because we grieve with them.
Police say Hale fired at officers from a 2nd-story window of the school. 2 officers ran toward that gunfire, shooting and killing her just 14 minutes after the first 911 call. Overnight, investigators found more guns and evidence at Hale's home, including detailed maps, surveillance of the school, and a manifesto revealing a planned targeted attack. Still, so far, police have not revealed a motive. This deadly shooting once again bringing the debate over gun reform front and center.
This person had 2 AR-15s and a handgun. You don't need this to go hunting. You don't need that to protect your family.
Congressman Tim Burchett represents Knoxville, Tennessee, and called the shooting horrible, but says there's no need to ban assault weapons.
I don't think you're going to stop the gun violence. The common thread is you've got somebody who's mentally ill and evil.
As Nashville residents struggle to cope with the tragedy that struck their city, the community is coming together at a prayer vigil Monday night. City leaders, law enforcement, and residents alike all request continued prayer as the families of the victims grieve and the investigation into the assault continues. I want to turn now overseas to Israel, where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the nation Monday night and put his government's judicial reform legislation on hold until after the month-long Passover recess. As Chris Mitchell now reports, some say the long assault by those opposing reform caused a deep division within the country, bordering on civil war.
In his address, Netanyahu cited King Solomon and the wisdom of splitting the baby in two and said he wanted to avoid splitting the nation in two.
When there's an opportunity to avoid civil war through dialogue, I, as Prime Minister, am taking a time for dialogue. I give a real opportunity for a real dialogue. We insist on the need to bring about the necessary corrections in the legal system, and we're given an opportunity to achieve a broad consensus. This is a very worthy goal.
After the address, Israeli President Isaac Herzog asked Netanyahu and opposition leaders Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid to work together to find a compromise. They agreed.
We will show up at the president's residence. We will extend our hand. I call on Netanyahu to take away the threats, ultimatums, and extreme statements that keep us away from the goal. Stop everything and send relevant teams to the president's residence. We will work to strengthen democracy, improve governance, and maintain the independence of the judicial system.
The White House applauded Netanyahu's decision.
Democratic societies are strengthened by checks and balances, and fundamental changes to a democratic system should be pursued with the broadest possible base of popular support. And so that's what we're going to continue to call for.
Yet proponents of the legislation said the law was designed to bring a check and balance on what they called Israel's runaway judiciary, arguing that the judicial system has had little or no restraint on it for decades. And many saw nearly 12 weeks of street protests as an attempt not just to win the debate over judicial reform, but to topple the government with accusations of the end of democracy and a dictatorship.
I don't remember that at the time that the levels of hatred were this violent, were this supported by the media, were driven by the media.
Israeli commentator Carolyn Glick says the intense internal strife put Israel in peril in light of Israel's #1 threat in the region, Iran.
People who don't want Israel to take action against Iran, of all stripes and sizes, would want Israel to be submerged in domestic rioting and discord to make it impossible as a practical matter for the army, for the government, for our intelligence arms to concentrate and focus on the task at hand, which is taking out a sufficient percentage of Iran's nuclear capabilities to keep them off the ability to develop a nuclear arsenal.
Israelis look forward to celebrating the Passover and the miracle of their deliverance from slavery in Egypt. Many are hoping and praying that Israel's leaders will also have a miracle during this Passover break. Ephraim?
Chris, what is the future of the reform plan now?
Well, right now, Ephraim, it's really on hold, and some of the parts of the judicial reform had gone through the first and second readings. Here in the Israelis' Knesset, they have to go through 3 readings before it becomes law. So I think almost all of the legislation right now is going to be reevaluated. And when they go to the president's residence and start negotiating, I think we may start with, back to square one in many ways. So there'll be hopefully some sort of, conference that will bring some resolution to the two sides. It really does perhaps put Netanyahu and those that are favoring judicial reform at a disadvantage because they had made some progress. And there's also one question, Ephraim, if the law does pass, would the Supreme Court strike it down? And that would really be a constitutional crisis here in Israel.
Indeed. Tell us about how Benjamin Netanyahu cited King Solomon in his address to the nation.
Well, that's how he started his address, Ephraim, and he cited the story in the Bible where it says that 2 women were brought before King Solomon. One of the babies had died, and each woman said that the surviving baby was theirs. So Solomon said, well, let's cut the baby in 2. And he knew that the real mother would say, no, I give that baby to the other one. So the reference Netanyahu said was the fact that we don't want the country to be split in 2, and it really has been for the last several weeks. So he felt it was important to pull back, to make a pause, particularly after the Passover recess, and then come back and see what they can do to resolve this issue. And as some people said, this was probably the worst crisis in Israel's history since the Yom Kippur War 50 years ago.
How would you describe Netanyahu's actions of late?
Well, I think right now it was sort of a tactical retreat. It really was politically overwhelming for him right now. The Labor Party for the Nation had called for a historic nationwide strike. That means the airport had been closed down, services and hospitals were restricted, shopping malls. So really, it was overwhelming. There were demonstrations here in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and different places around the country. So I think he realized, at least momentarily, he really had to have this sort of tactical retreat. On the other hand, Ephraim, what he had to do was politically hold his coalition together. There were some parties that were threatening to leave the coalition because of the pause in judicial reform. So he had to sort of circle the wagons, make sure that the coalition could be held together. And I think he's done that. So right now we'll have a few weeks to be able to, for those that favor judicial reform, to see what they can do to rally the country and push this legislation through.
Where does the country go from here?
Well, it's a great question, Ephraim. Really, like I said, some people had never seen the divisions here in Israel and ever before, and very discouraging for people that were proposing this judicial reform. And a lot of people had said that there were really a lot of outside influences that were bringing money. I mean, thousands and thousands of shekels and dollars to foment these demonstrations for nearly 3 months. So right now, I think both sides are going to be maintaining what they can do. Even though there's a sort of a truce at the time, I think both sides are resolute to try to see what they can do to push the agenda forward. But it's a very important time, Ephraim, to be praying for the leaders here in Israel and for the peace of Jerusalem.
Indeed. Our CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joining us from Jerusalem. Thank you so much, Chris. Much appreciated. Here at home, religion is becoming less important in America. That is according to a new poll from the Wall Street Journal and the National Opinion Research Center. It finds only 39% of Americans say religious faith is a top priority. That is down from 62% back in 1998. But at the same time, there's a new push to bring a foundation of biblical principles to American politics. The American First Policy Institute wants to empower people of faith when it comes to speaking about issues central to the future of the United States. Evangelical leaders, including some alums from the Trump administration's Faith Advisory Council, helped to launch the Biblical Foundation Project in D.C. today.
Politics matter because policy matters because people matter. And politics is really the ability to organize and influence.
I think politics are in the church already because many pastors are so political. God never called us to be conversationalists. He called us to confront people with the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
That movement comes as the Wall Street Journal poll showed Americans under 30 value religion far less than those who are older than 65. And patriotism is declining as well. Coming up, relief efforts underway in Mississippi after the extremely powerful tornado devastated areas of the state Friday night. We're going to bring you a look at what Christian relief organizations Operation Blessing and Samaritan's Purse are doing. We've got that story for you when we come back. Stay with us. Relief organizations, including CBN's Operation Blessing, are on the ground in Mississippi after the devastating EF4 tornado that left a trail of destruction and death Friday night. The nearly mile-wide twister traveled on the ground for about 60 miles, killing more than 24 people. CBN's Caitlin Burke brings us this look at some of the recovery effort.
As authorities and residents assess damage, disaster relief teams are on the ground helping on a personal level. I spoke with folks from both Operation Blessing and Samaritan's Purse, who have workers providing immediate help to those affected in this devastated region.
When we arrived in Rolling Fork, we were struck with how abrupt the path of destruction began. The houses on the outskirts of town were virtually untouched, but once you seemed to cross an invisible line, the destruction got increasingly bad, and to a point where there was only piles of debris in the center of town.
As Operation Blessing teams spread out across the disaster zone, relief supplies are already headed to local church partners.
Silver City said their biggest need was hygiene kits. And then we have water, Home Depot buckets, and cleaning supplies en route to Emory.
Franklin Graham, president of Samaritan's Purse, says much of this region is very poor, with many of the victims uninsured. That, he says, is where organizations like his come in.
I think sometimes God puts us in places like this so that we can be the insurance for them. And what I mean by being the insurance, God has given us the funds, the resources to be able to respond like this in a crisis.
Graham says Samaritan's Purse teams are here in Jesus' name, and they're focused on quite literally being the hands and feet of Christ.
But right now, we're not preaching. Right now, we're just helping people clean up their homes, cut trees off their houses. If a house is still standing, they lost their roof, we help tarp it so that they don't lose any more of their valuables in their home.
As residents continue to dig out and clean up, these organizations pledge to be in the region as long as it takes.
The damage is extensive, and so this will be a long rebuilding effort.
FEMA teams are also on the ground in Mississippi, and President Biden pledges full federal government support in emergency response efforts. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
If you'd like to help Operation Blessing bring help and hope to the people devastated by this tragedy in Mississippi, you can call 1-800-700-7000. You can also visit cbn.com or text OBDR to 71777. Still ahead, you've heard them call superfoods healthy eating like spinach, beets, raspberries, and almonds. But what you may not know is they can be toxic. Stay tuned and find out how and why right after this. You've likely heard the phrase, everything in moderation. It's associated with eating junk food and indulging in other bad habits. It also holds true, though, for certain superfoods like spinach, almonds, and some berries. Medical reporter Lori Johnson explains why too much of some healthy foods can be toxic.
If a food is good for you, then eating more of it is even better, right? Not necessarily. In some cases, too much of a good thing can become bad.
You can get yourself into trouble and have no idea, so it carries on for a long time because you would never suspect your favorite great food.
Some so-called superfoods like spinach, chia seeds, beets, and raspberries are high in oxalate. That's an often harmless chemical compound that for some people proves problematic if eaten in large amounts.
Now the fashions are these foods that are high in oxalate are very popular and promoted as good for us, so it's really easy to overdo it.
Other foods to watch for are quinoa, beans, and almonds because they're often consumed in large amounts, especially in gluten-free or dairy-free diets.
The almond milk and the almond flour, the almonds are thrown into every trail bar and trail mix and new version of granola and snacks everywhere and desserts. Almonds are a big problem because they're being adopted at a rate and being eaten at a rate that's never been done before.
Oxalate can attach to the minerals in our body and prevent these important nutrients from being absorbed. One example is calcium, which is necessary for strong bones. A calcium deficiency could lead to developing brittle bones, also known as osteoporosis.
And with men, it's particularly fatal. It seems to be that men break a bone, they're more likely to have that end up shortening their lives significantly.
Eating a lot of these high oxalate foods can also be tied to the formation of kidney stones.
Any kind of urinary tract problems are classic oxalate problems.
For years, nutritionist Sally Norton wondered why she suffered from foot pain, sleep problems, and arthritis. During the same time, she ate a lot of potatoes and Swiss chard. When she stopped eating those high oxalate foods, those health problems also stopped.
This really shocked me because I'm supposed to know how to be healthy, and I didn't.
She says others suffering from unexplained physical or mental health problems might want to examine whether they too could be eating too much of a good thing.
Oxalates are classically known to start harming digestion over time when you start having digestive issues that can look like stomach problems or reflux. It can look like swallowing problems, or more commonly, things like irritable bowel syndrome.
So if you're someone who eats a lot of your favorite superfood, if it's high in oxalate, it might be wise to back off a little. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
And you can hear more about toxic superfoods and the impact they can have on healthy living. It begins at 8:30 Eastern this evening on the CBN News channel. You can also watch it on the CBN News app and find it on YouTube as well. Coming up, an unusual new home that you could say is out of this world. We're going to bring you that story when we come back. Stay with us. A home builder in Ohio has put together a house that some would say is out of this world. It is a new house shaped like a flying saucer. The Futuro House drew visitors to the home and remodeling expo in Cleveland, Ohio. According to the creators, the prefabricated and customizable house reflects the booming popularity of those tiny homes. Futuro houses are made of molded fiberglass composites. The kit costs about $180,000 and there is some assembly required. Well, time now for your Tuesday Tweetable. I hope this message blesses you and your day, and you will in turn bless others by posting, tagging, tweeting, and sharing the message with those in your circles of influence. God is creator of all, and all that he created is good. That includes you, and even the person who doesn't like you. They are God's creation too. With that word, make this a terrific Tuesday on purpose and in purpose. Well, that will do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. I want to remind you, you can always find more of our programs on the CBN News channel. You can find them there at any time, as well as online at cbnnews.com. We would love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today or any day. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com, and reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Make it a terrific Tuesday. Come right back here tomorrow. We'll see you then.